Hello, everybody. I am your host, Mr. Porat of the Ramble podcast. And as you know, this is a two-parter. So this is the second part of the episode that is about our favorite stories. And we're just going to get right into it. And again, joining me is my friend Justin. Justin, would you like to take us away?
Hello, Mr. Porat. Thank you for having me. It is a beautiful Saturday morning. I have really enjoyed our conversation so far. I'm looking forward to this next half of the show. My next suggestion or my next story
Yes.
that I would like to talk about is Watership Down, specifically the cartoon from the late 70s. I think it was 1978 or 79. Now, this cartoon. I'm sure it is as complex and insightful as a story like Animal Farm that has, political undertones and so on and so forth. I simply like it as simply a story about survival. It is, and I think I made you watch this. I think I made all of us.
Yeah, we watched it as a group on Discord, I think.
Yes, and so, all right, it's a story about a group of rabbits. They're leaving their warren. They're off in search of their own warren where they can be free. It's a fairly simple premise, and I just want to diverge for just a second.
Sure.
Maurice Sendak, the author of Where the Wild Things Are and all those children's book. If you ever get a chance to watch an interview with him, I highly recommend it. Specifically, Stephen Colbert interviewed Maurice Sendak very near the end of Maurice's life, and it was really a very beautiful interview, poignant and touching. Maurice Sendak is just a beautiful man. But he always talks about how he wanted in his stories to convey the terror of childhood. And you know what? He's right. Childhood is fucking terrifying. You've never felt pain before in childhood until you do. You've never had loss before until, in childhood until you experience loss. So you're experiencing all these very, very, tragic emotions aren't quite the word, but they're these heavy, almost existential emotions that children are experiencing for the first time, and that is scary as hell. And I appreciate children's stories that in some way acknowledges this. And I think Watership Down does a good job of doing that. As we travel with these rabbits, there's a great deal of violence in this movie. There's a great deal of blood in this movie, and loss, and terror. One of the main characters is a prophetic rabbit who sees blood covering everything. So I like it because in the late 70s and early 80s, this movie was marketed as a children's movie. It was marketed right alongside the animated version of The Lord of the Rings, Donald Duck, so on and so forth. So a lot of children in my generation were exposed to this. And for many of us, this was kind of it was an introduction into existential dread.
Yep.
and I don't mean to say that in a funny way. I mean to say that this was kind of a soft way for a child to experience and be introduced with some of the more negative, terrifying facets of life. And I think it serves stories like that serve a really important utility of allowing kids to get a glimpse of these very difficult concepts in a way that isn't totally, I'm just trying to think the word, destructive.
Right.
I mean,
vicariously through it.
Yeah,
So yeah,
exactly. You
they
know,
have a good distance.
if you're 5 or 6 and your dog dies, that's the fucking end of the world. You
Hmm.
know, and that's not even like, you know, if like your parent passed or something awful happened to a close friend or family member. So I think stories like that are very important culturally, just so that we have a way to yes, vicariously experience these things, prepare ourselves, begin to understand the world we live in, and start to chew on these really big ideas. So yeah, it also has, and I would recommend going to YouTube and searching for the introduction and the credit scene for Watership Down. It has a
Yeah.
rather beautiful animated kind of a myth, the mythology of the
Hmm.
mythos of the rabbits, you know, where you meet the rabbit god, and
Hmm.
it was poignant. It was beautiful. So Watership Down, that's my number three as far as important stories in my personal history. And I also am realizing as we go along that my list is not very um, there's a lot of white men here. In fact, there's only white men, really, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. And I think that, you know, and I think that says a lot about our culture. I mean, I'm a product of my time. You know, I
Yeah.
grew up in the 80s and 90s, and there
Hmm.
wasn't much representation. Now, if we're
Hmm.
talking, say, poetry, you know, I could do a little bit better. But as far as like my early childhood, my adolescence, and young adulthood,
Hmm.
and first part of my adulthood, these were the stories that made a big impact on me. So,
Hmm.
anyways, just to explain the lack of diversity in my list, back to you, Mr. Porat.
No, I think there's plenty. I mean, there might not be, diversity within the creators of these products, but the products themselves are
Yeah.
so, opposed in terms of
Yes.
what they're focusing on. And I find that interesting. And with
Yes.
Watership Down, because the first time I ever watched Watership Down was with you
Hmm.
that night. I think it might have been about a year and a half ago, maybe
Yep.
something like that. And I
Hmm.
remember something that we had a conversation, the four of us, we had a conversation about it afterwards, and you and I tend to be more accepting of violence
Yes.
in film, just in general, as
Yeah.
opposed to our two other friends that we were doing it with. And I remember we were talking about the violence in it, and one of our friends said, "I just don't know." Something along the lines of, "I don't know. Did a kids show really need to have that? Did it need to be that
Hmm.
violent? Did it need to?"
Hmm.
And I always thought that was interesting that they said that because obviously they're a little bit younger than I am, and I'm
Hmm.
obviously younger than you, and so they came from. And I also think about how they grew up, and they came from a household where they watched the more kid-friendly
Hmm.
modern day Disney films, like
Hmm.
things more akin to Moana, Tangled, things where, and this is nothing against people that like
Hmm.
modern day Disney, it's totally fine if you do, but they don't necessarily have those stakes
They don't.
that something like Watership Down has. And so I personally love that something like Watership Down didn't shy away from that. I think like what you were hinting at, it's important to do that because it
Hmm.
hits on pivotal moments for children. And I think about something like Watership Down, where you're not you're not trying to scare sense into a kid. You're just trying to
No.
show a kid that the world can be scary, but you can overcome obstacles and doing it in a realistic way. And
Yes.
I think about when I was when I was younger and the things I would watch because I started Pixar, Disney, and then I
Yeah.
started to get into more violent things, and I turned out all right, I think. And I ended up realizing I got more out of that because I never felt like I was the product I was watching. I felt like it was respecting my intelligence and it was
Hmm.
respecting my time because it wasn't trying to shy away from those things.
Yeah.
And something like Watership Down, it falls into that category for me. So I'm
Yeah.
glad it was on your list because I
Yeah.
did enjoy it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know. Was there anything else you wanted to say about Watership Down, or is it pretty clear
No, although
cut?
you used a word, a phrase that I really enjoy, especially in storytelling, high stakes.
Mm,
Um, there, and I think all the stories we've brought up so far, there have been some sort of high stakes. Although Bloom County arguably was not necessarily high stakes. But when there is a sense of something to be gained or lost in storytelling, when an author can do that, that
mhm.
really is such a huge part of successful storytelling. I think is creating a situation, a scenario, a world where there are stakes, real stakes involved.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. Did you ever see? Didn't they come out with a? I don't know how many iterations there are of this story, but I
They
believe
did,
it was a
they did
Netflix
a
one.
recent, they did a recent, recent within the last probably 10 or 15 years. I have not seen it. It was, if I remember correctly, it was a series, which is interesting.
Hmm.
I have not watched it. I probably should. Um, so yeah, that's something that probably should be on my list.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that
Indeed.
because well, maybe I won't. I don't know if I find time.
Yeah.
Not that it's necessarily high on my list because I got what I wanted out of the original. So I don't know
Hmm.
if I necessarily want to see a remake or anything like that because you know me, I'm a little hesitant when it comes to modern day remakes and adaptations and stuff
Agreed.
like that. So I don't know if I want that. Um,
I think it would be well, yeah, I think it would be useful just as far as critiquing. It would
yeah,
be. I think it would be productful. Productful, is that a word? That's
it
not
could
a
be.
word. I
It
don't
could
know.
be. Be the
Productive.
change you want to
Productive.
see. Offer it up as a new word.
There you go. But I mean, shit, it's got James McAvoy in it, dude. I like him. I mean, I love his
Oh, that's
voice.
right. Yeah.
And there's some good talent. Ben Kingsley. Oh God, Ben Kingsley. He
Oh, that's
plays
right.
yeah, he plays like one of the really big mean rabbits.
Hmm.
Um so yeah, I mean, I think it would be interesting just to see how they handled the adaptation. This was done in 2018, so right
Hmm.
before the pandemic. Um
That's true. Yeah.
yeah, I might have to put it on my list just to just so I can have a comparison.
Yeah, it would be interesting too because the main comparison I think that would crop up is the different eras that they were
Hmm.
produced in and
Hmm.
how they're trying to portray that story. And I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling, and I would love to be proven wrong. But considering how some media is nowadays, in some ways, censorship is worse now than it has been in a long time in some regards. And so I wonder
Indeed.
if they would dilute a lot of the
Hmm.
violence and things like that.
Hmm.
Maybe they would say that it was gratuitous or didn't have a place in
Hmm.
it. I personally would disagree. I think
Agreed.
that
Yeah.
would, I would think that, in my opinion, the violence in the original, it was used for a purpose
It
and it never
was.
felt gratuitous.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah, that was a good pick. That
Thank
was a
you.
really good
Thank
pick.
you. Yeah.
I don't, do you have anything else you want to say
I'm
about it?
good.
Or?
I'm good.
Okay.
Back to you,
All
my
right.
friend.
Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna. This is what I like about our lists because we pivot a lot. So we go from cartoon rabbits ravaging each other and real world analogs, that are portrayed within that.
Hmm.
And now we're shifting over to a video game series that is pretty near and dear to my heart and
Hmm.
pretty formative for me, I would say, in terms of uh, how it influenced me as a writer and also as a viewer of different different creative pieces and the
Okay.
rhetorical moves that are made. And so that series is Mass Effect. Um,
Ah.
I'm a very big Mass Effect fan, more specifically of the original trilogy, one through
Hmm.
three. I'm not really going to get into the newer one, Andromeda, because I don't particularly like it. But with Mass Effect, yeah, I don't even really know where to begin. I guess just before we start, are you somewhat familiar with the Mass Effect series?
I played all three, absolutely.
You
Yeah.
have. You have.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
It's
you
been a
are
while, but I know the general narrative. Yes.
right. Yeah. I thought we had talked about it a few times, but we never
Mm-hmm.
like sat down and had a discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting too. So I guess to give context, the first time I played Mass Effect, that was still back in the era when I was not that critical of
Mm-hmm.
things quite yet. I think it came out. The
Mm-hmm.
first one came out in 2007, and I think I got it either that year or the year after. I want to say, and that was back in the time when I would just pick up games, random games, and
Mm-hmm.
I would bring them home. And I remember I picked it up for my Xbox just randomly. I was with my grandparents, and I've always liked sci-fi, so I saw this beautiful sci-fi woman on the cover and some
Mm-hmm.
aliens, and I said, "That's yeah, I want to try that."
Yeah.
And I brought it home and I popped it in, and almost immediately I started to see things. It was unlike anything I had really played before
Ooh.
because it was very much the type of RPG where I was taking on the role of this legendary space soldier, if you will. And I was taking
Yeah.
on that role. And I was taking on that role and I was uncovering this vast galaxy time spanning mystery. And I was experiencing the story of that legendary soldier. And I was right next to them going throughout that. And more specifically, what I really love about the games is the world building.
Mm-hmm.
And they were the first games that really made me realize how creative some people can be in this industry and how difficult it must be to create a believable, living, breathing, not even a world, a galaxy. I
Yeah.
mean, it went beyond that. They had to think about the logistics of other alien races,
Mm-hmm.
how the cultures intersect.
Yeah.
It was one of the first games that actually got me interested in politics because
Really? Oh yeah.
real world politics, I don't really care about that much
Mm-hmm.
because I would argue they're not really politics anymore. It's just screaming matches.
Yeah.
But in Mass Effect, it had nuances of political intrigue and all this stuff,
Yeah.
and I was just getting so into it and trying to understand all of this and how it was drawing me in. And it got to the point where after I played that first one, I was just hooked and I played it constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember waiting diligently for the second to come out as well. And when the second came out, it was even better. I would argue it's probably the best one of the series. And what the second one does so well, what the first one did so well was setting the stage. It was the
Mm-hmm.
first one. It set the stage. It made it so you became familiar with where everything was and the stakes. And so I give it credit for that. It's not my favorite, but I give it credit
Mm-hmm.
for setting the stage in that way. And
Yeah.
the second one is the most intimate one, I would say.
Okay.
It's a lot more, it's scaled back a little bit in terms of scope and it's more focused. And I like it for that aspect because it's more focused on you building up your your squad, your magnificent seven, if you will, even though there's
Mm-hmm.
12
Yeah.
companions. But building up that group to take down this threat, and it's very much about you getting to know those people intimately, helping them with their own baggage, so they can better
Mm-hmm.
focus on the mission to save the galaxy.
Yeah.
Like, it was just so amazing. And then the third one it has a lot of aspects of existentialism and
Mm-hmm.
dread
Yeah.
and the effects of war. And the third one, I actually like the third one a lot, and it's probably the messiest of the three. But I do like the third one a lot because of how it brings a lot of that stuff that's been building up for all those years. It brings a lot of closure to that.
I see.
Some of it hits better than others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I know a lot of people have problems with the ending of the third one, and I do too as well. But I think the journey was well worth it in the third one. And being able to make me care about this galaxy that this game
Mm-hmm.
takes place in and these characters for 3 games
Yes.
was just something that I don't think any game series outside of maybe Halo has done for
Hmm.
me in some time.
I see. Yep.
Um, yeah, sorry, I'm rambling. I just can't say it.
No. Well, first of all, I mean that's the whole point of the show,
That's true. That's true.
and second of all, I just think it's such an interesting evolution of storytelling. Uh,
Mm,
I am very excited to see where video games go. I mean,
mm,
how long before we just Bluetooth wirelessly connect our brains to the server, and we're inside a world,
mm.
because that's going to happen.
Oh, Elon will
Um,
do it. I'm sure.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Uh,
But yeah, so what I think is really interesting is just that those three games took you on such a fabulous ride,
mm,
and it was so immersive. And I do remember, I know I played the first two all the way through. The third one I just can't remember,
mm,
but I do remember liking the second one better as well.
mm.
And it was simply that I really enjoyed the times we were on the station or on the ship. I believe it was the ship, right?
Yeah, the Normandy.
Yeah,
Uh,
and just learning all about your companions, and
yeah,
learning like their secrets, and
right.
it was you started to feel a part of something bigger than yourself,
Mm,
and that's pretty amazing, I think.
mm. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Where you're unpacking these people's secrets and you're interacting with them. And I was
Yeah.
actually talking about this with another friend not too long ago, and we were talking about how with those games you play as your main character is Commander Shepard,
Yeah.
and we were disagreeing with some people because some people would say like, "Well, you are Commander Shepard, you are
Hmm.
Commander," and we almost kind of push back against that, and we're more so of the mind of we're not Commander Shepard. Commander Shepard is their own person,
Hmm.
but we get to decide who Commander Shepard is within
Hmm.
this world, and
Yeah.
we get to help steer where that is. Commander
Yes.
Shepard is a character that's there, and
Yeah.
we essentially get to decide how will Commander Shepard be known throughout the galaxy.
Yeah.
We're basically making our own. I think of like, I mean, hell, we're making our own Mad Max. Mad Max is this mythical figure,
Hmm.
kind of a legend, and then he made certain choices. I'm trying to think of other examples. I guess a Luke Skywalker, just your classic hero that
Yes.
has to go through those steps that becomes a legend, something more than themselves. And to put that in the hands of someone, either at their computer or just at their TV, having that much power to shape the idea of a legend within an entire galaxy
Yeah.
is powerful.
It is.
And like you said, it will be interesting to see where that leads for future storytelling. So it's exciting. But
It
yeah,
is.
that is my third pick, the Mass Effect series.
All
So
right.
we can uh we can move on to yours now. For your this is
Okay.
your fourth one, right?
This will be my
Yeah.
fourth. It is A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. Again, and you just can't get more white than John Irving. I mean, he is just a New England white man. But the thing I do love about John Irving in general is that he does such a great job of creating these wonderful, perfect little New England settings, and then throwing a wrench into all the works.
Mm,
Um, he deconstructs those perfect settings very well. I'm thinking of like Cider House Rules. I'm thinking of
oh, that's right.
obviously,
He wrote
yeah,
that. Yeah,
he
yeah,
did.
yeah.
Prayer for Owen Meany, obviously, um, and I could go on, but it's I love how he creates these stereotypical perfect settings, and then he introduces the bizarre, the grotesques, the unwanted, orphans, widows, the misunderstood, the hated, and the excluded. Um, he really does a good job of putting us into of giving us the perspective of those on the outside.
Mm,
Um, and he does a good job of being both the 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 people who are the majority. He does a good job of the people who are the minority. I just really enjoy the fact that he shows all these tiny secrets and how all these tiny secrets build up into all these big differences and tears apart this perfect idea of a nice little conservative town.
Mm.
And it was also this. All right, so this story in particular
Mm-hmm.
is about John Wheelwright and Owen Meany. And John Wheelwright is a very not entitled. He is a very affluent. Comes from a very affluent family. He has a wonderful mother. Does not know who his father is. And lives in a rather big house. And Owen Meany is not affluent. His family does not have a big house, and they become very good friends. It's at its heart, it is a buddy movie. It's about friendship. It's about faith. It's about things that don't fit. It's about loss. It's about small town life. It's about how we make meaning out of tragedy. And it was the first contemporary, quote unquote, literary book I read as an adult and really understood and really enjoyed. My first wife actually received it as a high school graduation gift from her psychology teacher. And to me, it was a revelation that literature, even quote unquote, serious literature, could include the grotesque, could include the unwanted, could include the widows. It really, in a way that most contemporary literature did not. And just for a reference, John Irving will always include orphans in his story. He himself was an orphan. So I think we see a lot in that stories, but he talks a lot about being an orphan. He includes midgets. He includes minority, differences based on skin. Now I'm not saying he writes it perfectly, but those are the people he is focusing on, and he allows us to go through their journey. And I think that's just so very important as people in a very large, diverse world that has the tendency to squash difference, that has the tendency to ostracize those who don't fit. His storytelling allows us to see what life is like on that side of the equation. So that's my fourth pick, I believe. I'm a big John Irving fan in general. I haven't read anything of his in quite some time, but he's worth it. Although I do think if I was going to pick something out now, I probably would pick something different because, again, we're looking at a lot of white men here.
Well, they're people too.
They are people too.
It's okay.
Yeah. But there seems to be a trend in my picks. So, anywho, John Irving, A Prayer for Owen Meany. That's my fourth pick.
I'm going to be completely honest. Yeah. The only book of his I've read was Cider House Rules.
What did you think of that?
I remember. I mean, he's a good writer.
Yeah,
and so I acknowledge that. It's not. There's a lot of good stuff within that. I personally got to a point where I was not really that invested anymore in that story because isn't the main character that is his name Wilbur, or what's his name? I don't remember what his name is.
So the young man, the orphan, his name is Homer Wells.
Homer, and I don't know why I thought Wilbur.
Yeah. Wilbur Larch is the doctor.
Oh, that's why. Yeah. So I think it starts off interesting, but it was hard for me to get invested in it, and it's just kind of a me thing. But the two main characters, Homer and I forget his love interest,
Candy.
Yeah. That whole love triangle, I didn't really care for that much, and that's where I started to really lose a lot of interest, and it's just they all kind of become bad people, kind of, and it's in terms of because they have like I don't even know how long that affair goes on for, but it goes on for a long time, and
It does.
while the friend is there, he's a paraplegic, I think, or um,
Correct.
and he's just there, and it's going, and so it's like, and I get that there's like that's an aspect of it, but to me, it got to a point where I couldn't even really enjoy it anymore because I don't care about any of the characters at that point, and it just got kind of miserable towards the end.
I, it does. I mean, there is a great deal of bitter sadness there at the end because no
Yeah,
one wins. Not really. There isn't a quote unquote happy ending. I mean,
yeah,
people move on. They
right,
build their lives, they continue, they persevere. But there isn't this like moment where you feel, oh man, that's beautiful.
right,
So yeah, but again, I would argue that's also an important aspect of storytelling is to allow us
right,
to experience that, accept that, prepare ourselves for that,
right,
because often life does not have any kind of happy ending. We just, if we're lucky, we get to move on.
right. Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that for me, it made it hard for me to get into that type of story based
Oh, for
on
sure.
what I like. And
Yeah.
so, and it's not even like because I do like stuff like that where it's not like just a clean cut ending. I just didn't,
Hmm.
for whatever reason, it didn't really resonate with me. But it is well written, and I think it's worth people's time. I never read A Prayer for Owen Meany. I haven't read any of his other stuff, but you explaining it, that sounds interesting. I may have to go through it someday.
I do think you would like it just because it is a really good buddy movie or buddy story, and I'm
Oh,
such a sucker for buddy stories.
right, yeah.
And it's it just shows because it starts when they're young. I mean, it starts off when they're like 5 or 6, and it follows them all the way until they're, I would say, in their mid 20s. And
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and so I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the watching their bond grow and their friend, and they're very. It's a rather beautiful relationship that they have.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's worth checking out. I think in retrospect, like I said, I would probably choose something different if I was looking for something now. But back
Oh,
then,
sure.
it was something that I really appreciated and had a big impact on me creatively.
Mhm. No, I'm glad you chose it then, because
Yeah,
obviously, it was that's what the whole point of these two episodes are, is finding those stories that had some type of impact on
yeah.
us. So, and I'm glad this one had a positive one on you. I feel bad that I can't offer up much more because I've never read it, but I am aware of his writing style, and he's a good writer.
He is.
So I definitely would be interested in reading more of his work.
I apologize. That is my production assistant. He is. Oh dear.
It's
I
okay. He's doing his thing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure. Yes, he is doing his thing.
As he does.
Yes.
Yes, this was planned. Just so everybody knows, we planned
Yes,
this.
of course.
So here on the Ramble podcast, we plan for every eventuality. So just so everybody is aware of that.
Absolutely.
Um, but okay, yeah. Was there anything? Was there anything else you wanted to say about your number 4 pick?
I think that about wraps it up.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that because I was unaware of that. So I may have to
Incidentally,
look into that.
they did an adaptation of it. It was called Simon Birch. It was awful. I was really
Oh,
I was really disappointed in it. Although it had Oliver Platt, who I really
oh,
love as an actor.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was an awful adaptation. I don't think they've ever. Cider House Rules actually wasn't a bad adaptation. That was pretty good.
That's with Toby Maguire, Charlize Theron, and
Correct.
Michael Caine and Paul Rudd, right?
Yeah. Yes.
I,
Exactly.
I I
Yes.
don't know why I remember that so vividly, but
I don't either, but well done.
yeah. I don't even think I've ever seen it. I think I think I'm aware of it, but that's interesting.
Yeah.
Um, But okay, yeah, thanks for that, man. That was
Okay,
interesting
my pleasure.
and insightful. And I actually kind of want to, now that we're going on to my fourth one, I want to piggyback off of something that you mentioned. And you mentioned you are a fan of buddy stories,
Yes.
where, and that's interesting because that is actually my fourth pick, which is, I guess it's a buddy story at its most base level. It is True Detective season one,
Oh
and
man, yes.
this is interesting because this is more of a new fascination of mine. I actually just watched all four seasons of True Detective for the first time. I think last month.
Hmm.
Um, but I obviously started because I'd always heard that True Detective season one was amazing,
Yeah.
and I never got around to watching it. So I
Hmm.
finally forced myself to sit down and I watched it, and I immediately fell in love with it.
Yeah.
It just hit every beat that I
Yeah.
loved. Not really. I'm not going to talk about the other seasons, obviously, because I don't really like the other seasons. But season one, though,
Amazing.
it's amazing, and I don't even really know where to start with that. I mean, I guess I'll start from for those that don't know. Um, the basic premise is that it follows two state policemen. Um, and I think it's Officer Russ Cole, played by Matthew McConaughey, and Officer Marty Hart, played by Woody Harrelson, and they're phenomenal. And
Yeah.
they're the main draw. It's just seeing their relationship, and
Yeah.
the storyline takes place across, I think it's three pivotal points in time. It's when they first start working together, and they start working a case about figuring out who murdered this innocent woman in kind of a ritualistic manner, and they technically never really find the right person. And then it jumps forward a few years, follows their relationship as partners over 7 years. They have a falling out, and their lives kind of take some weird turns. And then it goes to modern day time, which they intercut throughout. And that is kind of them coming back together again. And I don't even really want to get too much into it because I don't want to ruin it for people who haven't seen it. I think it's one of those things that you really need to start from beginning to end, knowing as little as possible.
Yes.
But what I will say is I'll talk about what something in it that I think it does really well, and I've seen people, in my opinion, not seem to really understand what the point of the show was. And
Hmm.
one of the main aspects of it was talking about the danger of men, and but not in the sense where it's saying all men are villains. It's not saying it like that. It is saying how men have all of this power in society, and what do they choose to do with that power? And
Hmm.
it's following Russ Cole and Marty Hart, and they are, to put it lightly, they are messed up individuals.
Yes.
Russ Cole has kind of a dark past with his daughter dying at a young age. He felt responsible, and he turned to drugs, which he went undercover for a while. That didn't help as well, and so he has hallucinations now, and so he's not quite right in the head, and he's very much nihilistic and cynical to the point where he almost feels like an alien from another planet. He doesn't feel like he can really interact with other people. And Marty Hart, played by Woody Harrelson, is just stubborn enough to put up with it. He seems to be the only one that can really manage it. Everybody else doesn't really know what to make of him, but for some reason, Marty Hart's like, we have our problems and this and that. Because Marty Hart too starts off where he's flawed. He cheats on his wife. He's a bit of a womanizer. He's got very outdated views on, like I don't know, like the placement of a woman within a household
Hmm.
and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but it's interesting because it shows them these two characters where they do some bad things. They're two people that do some bad things throughout the show, throughout the
Yes.
first season. But it never once makes you go, these are bad people. There might be a few points early on where you question how you feel about them. But towards the end, you realize that they were both good men. They were just good men that did bad things, and then they redeemed themselves at the end. And it's honestly beautiful how they come together, because they're two broken men, and they come together at the end in a very powerful. And I'm not going to give it away. Obviously, I don't want to ruin that for anybody, but it's a journey that's well worth sitting through and seeing to the end.
I think that's a really good way of saying of looking at it. It is a journey, and I really do like the way they bring it to a close. And it gives me a sense of I have been through something. I
Mhm.
have gone through something and I am now changed. And when a story can have that impact on me, it that is a story worth watching.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed it as well. The dialogue alone, just
The dialogue's so good.
the back and forth between Woody Harrelson's character and Matthew McConaughey's character is
Mhm.
amazing. The difference that they show, I mean, they show such a stark difference between the characters between what was it, the mid '90s when it first takes place,
Yeah, it's in the '90s.
and then current day. They do such a good job of differentiating between who those people are in the past and who they are now.
Right.
And as you said, these are not bad people. These are really fucked up people.
Mhm.
um, if you want to look at it, through a cultural lens or a socially critical lens,
Mhm.
society has asked these men to do things that are very, very difficult.
Right.
They are homicide detectives. Well, they're
Mhm.
detectives. I don't know if they're strictly homicide, but they see really fucked up shit.
Right.
They see bad things happening to people all the time, and
Mhm.
that is very difficult to deal with. I happen to know a couple detectives. They're older now,
Mhm.
and I can see where the work had a really uh, a, a really negative effect on them.
Mhm.
Alcoholism,
Right.
yeah, so yeah, I really like the story in the sense that it doesn't pull any punches. Yet at the
Mhm.
end, there's not just a sense of completion, but a sense of growth. Um,
Right.
in a sense of Jesus. As dark as the story is, at the end there is a sense of hope. In fact, that's kind of
Right.
the whole point.
Right.
Um, but again, it made me that damn good choice, Mr. Porat. That was because we both watched it about the same time, and
Yeah.
god
We should
damn,
watch
it
it
was,
together.
oh god, I know it was so good.
Mhm.
So yeah, excellent pick.
Thanks, man. And I want to say you brought up a good point. Just before we move on, because I don't have much else to say about it, but you brought up a good point about how it looks at these two characters, and it looks at how the show acknowledges that these are people who have done messed up things, but it's due in large part to the career path they have chosen and
Yes.
the fucked up things that they are forced to just constantly approach head on.
Yeah.
But it does that, but it never once tries to make excuses for their actions.
Correct.
It's not trying to use their hard job as a way to forgive what they have done.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It's a way for you to understand them. It's not necessarily like right or wrong. It's just that this is what it can do to people, and just because in a lot of ways they're everyday people,
They are.
and that's a good way to show it. And I think more so Marty Hart, because Marty Hart feels very
Yes.
much like he's the everyman kind of guy, and so
Yep.
you get to really see it through his lens. Because by the time you meet Russ Cole, he's already pretty
Gone.
damaged. He's pretty damaged, and that's what I love about the
Yeah.
relationship is that Marty Hart, in a lot of ways, even though he's a bit of a hypocrite himself, he actually brings out a lot of humanity
Yeah.
in Russ Cole, because in a lot of ways, Marty Hart is the flawed one, but he's also the one that's more human.
Yes.
Whereas Russ Cole is more focused and perfect in terms
Yeah.
of not being bogged down by vices and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I mean, except for his alcoholism and drug use, but I mean, but in other ways, it's usually he uses that as a way to complete the mission. And so Marty Hart brings out his humanity, and Russ Cole kind of helps Marty mature over
Yes.
time, and they help each other in those ways. And
Yeah.
it's one of those buddy stories that feels you actually feel like they're not just there for quippy banter and
Hmm.
stuff like that. They're there to help each other, whether
Yes.
they know it or not.
Yeah.
And that's about all I have to say about it.
I just want to add one more thing
Yeah, yeah,
about
absolutely.
Marty's character. Now, in the story, he is a philanderer. He's an alcoholic,
Hmm.
or he definitely drinks too much.
Yeah,
He can be he is definitely flawed. And there's a scene where his present day character stops to see his ex wife, and
yeah,
it's alluded to that he doesn't have a close relationship with his daughters,
yeah.
and you can tell that he does not know how.
Right.
um, and that there is a great deal in my heart. There was a great deal of sympathy for him. So that's again just the quality of writing when
Right.
you can present a character who is extraordinarily flawed. I mean, Marty's character is fucked up. He did some really hurtful things to the people around him, and
Mhm.
he, like I said, he's not even close with his children. um, Yet we can understand why, and we can sympathize with him, and
Mhm.
that's good storytelling.
Yeah, no,
Right.
absolutely. I
So
completely agree with you.
so well done, excellent pick.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to see what you have next.
All right, so for my fifth and final pick, again, a New Englander, a man, a white man. You just can't get more vanilla than Stephen King. uh,
Oh,
but he wrote my fifth story, and it is It. The story
yes. Okay.
It.
All right. I'm all in. Okay.
Um, so first of all, I'm going to say it is a problematic story. It has never been adapted well.
Hmm.
The Tim Curry version I prefer, just because it has
Hmm.
Tim Curry. The most recent adaptation, if they had done a series, as is the
Right.
case so many times, if they had done
Yeah.
12 episodes or 8 episodes, and
Hmm.
dedicated that time and money and quality to this story, maybe they would have done it right. It's not a movie that can be done in 4 hours or 6 hours. It just isn't. It's what, about 800, 1,000 pages long.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So it's problematic, as far as trying to bring it to the theater. But I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy it, is because you cannot adapt it to a movie. It really is a story that must be read.
Hmm.
Um, there are obviously problematic things. I can't justify the adolescent
Oh
sex
God.
scene
Yeah.
at the end of it, but um, the things I love about it, it is an expansive, epic tale that takes the course of decades. We
Hmm.
follow the Losers Club from the time they are 12ish all the way up until their mid 30s, early 40s.
Hmm.
Um, it's extremely graphic. It pulls no punches. I mean,
Hmm.
the opening scene is the death of George Denbrough, who is Stuttering Bill's little brother. And it is an awful death. He
Hmm.
loses an arm. He's wearing this yellow rain slicker, and for me, the image of blood on that yellow rain slicker was just awful.
Yeah.
And so it is a powerful, powerful, powerful story.
Hmm.
And much like John Irving, Stephen King is able to paint these beautiful New England settings, and then
Hmm.
showing the decay and rot that exists in the center of him, or in the
Hmm.
the center of those settings. Obviously, there's Lovecraftian elements. You know way more about Lovecraft than I do, but I really like just the ex. It's not even existential dread. It's that primal fear of the unknown, the primal fear of something
Hmm.
that's so much greater than you, and that
Right.
is actively hostile to you or doesn't give a shit about you.
Hmm.
He really. He really paints that picture well. And similarly, just like Maurice Sendak and Watership Down, most of his stories revolve around children and monsters. He
Mm-hmm.
is a modern Grimm's fairy tale storyteller. Um, it presents the idea of childhood as a terrifying time, and you know what? It is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and for me, it was and is one of the most powerful and important stories of my life because it deals explicitly with fear, with you know awful circumstances, with terror and tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's showing people going through these extraordinary times, and we need that. We need templates from which we can navigate our own lives
Mm-hmm.
as we outrun the monster underneath the bridge, or as we're trying to find the creature's lair deep underground. These stories, I think, can act as a bit of a light for us to guide our way.
Mm-hmm.
So you're familiar with the story. Have you ever read the book?
I have never read it all the way through, and
Gotcha.
I want to, which I will someday.
It's a commitment. It's
Mm-hmm.
long, and like I said, it is epic. Well worth it. Well worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy. Uh, I mean, just just from a storytelling perspective, a nuts and bolts perspective, he is a master of showing children and then taking them into adulthood and then
Mm-hmm.
jumping back and forth narratively. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it it was amazing. I really enjoyed the way he blended both the tale of the children and the tale of the adults together, where
Yeah.
you're bouncing back and forth between past and present, and it works.
Mm-hmm.
And just as a character development, he's very good at creating character driven stories. So I feel like characters are making choices, characters are driving the plot narrative,
Right.
characters are the center. I love the way that he takes an everyday person and puts them into an extraordinary circumstance, and
Mm-hmm.
and he shows us what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now he does have a problem, just like a lot of other authors. There's the magical black person in most of his stories,
Yes.
which
Yes.
is kind of weird. And like for example, the Gunslinger series, the one of the main characters is a black woman in a wheelchair named Susanna. I tried to read the Gunslinger again, and I just found his portrayal of the black woman, Susanna, to be absolutely cringy. So I, you know, he has his limitations and he has his faults, but for me, it was a seminal piece of storytelling that's influenced me as both someone who enjoys reading and watching stories and listening stories and also telling stories.
I think that I'm really glad that you chose this. By the way, I think it's exciting because I I usually think of it when I think of how to portray a story,
Yeah,
and also what stories work in which medium over
yeah,
others.
yeah.
Because I do not like. I mean, I prefer. I don't like either of the movie adaptations,
Hmm.
like the miniseries or anything like that.
Yeah,
But I would say that I at least have more. The Tim Curry one has more personality
it does. Yeah,
going on in it. I don't think it's aged very well, but Tim Curry is a lot of fun in it,
yeah.
and there are aspects, mainly when they're kids, because when they're adults, I think the writing just went
Broke
down
down. It did.
in the miniseries and
Yeah.
everything. Um, and so, but there's a lot more character to it, and the
Mhm.
more modern ones, I guess you could say that they're technically better. Like they look better, the acting's more
Mhm.
consistent, it's got better effects, but it just doesn't have a lot of personality. And I think what you were talking about with the original story is how he almost kind of effortlessly goes back and forth between when they're kids and when they're
Yes.
adults.
It's
And
amazing.
the book is so long that it allows him time to do
Yeah.
that. Whereas with the I guess the miniseries did a better job because the miniseries had a little bit more time
Hmm.
to actually do it. But the movies don't do a good job at all in that respect, in my
No.
opinion, because there's only so much time for
Yeah.
a movie. So the
Yeah.
movie focuses solely on them as kids. And then the second movie awkwardly has
Yeah.
moments where it goes back to when they're kids. And
Yeah.
it's very awkward. It's not scary. It's very. I think that's my biggest thing is, and I don't even mean just like jump scares. I just mean
Yeah.
like pure terror and dread, and that's what the book gets really well.
Yes.
That pure terror and dread, and the movies don't have that.
Yes.
There's scenes that do, like in the first movie with Georgie getting killed.
Yeah.
Um, that's pretty terrifying. I
It
don't
is.
I don't think the kid's performance was terribly convincing, but
Mhm.
it's still a pretty grotesque scene, and I feel like
Yeah.
it kind of works. But everything else does not. But you do mention how there's obvious influence from Lovecraft,
Yeah.
and I always love like when I always think of the
Oh
deadlights
my
of
God. Yes.
and
Yes.
his explanation of the deadlights
Yeah.
and how he describes them, and that is very Lovecraftian
Yeah.
to me. And then I know some people they don't like when he gets into like Manchurian, the magical giant celestial turtle and how it
It's
barfed
one
up
of my
our existence.
favorites.
I no, I like it too, and
Yeah.
I because he goes so far with it, and he actually explains the lore. And see again, that's another thing where he has time to
Lore. Yeah.
explain it. He has lore, and I don't think they touch on the turtle or anything like that in it part two, the new one.
No, they
Uh,
don't.
I don't think they do, and I think that kind of. I mean, I guess in terms of pacing, I'm glad that they didn't because they
Yeah.
wouldn't have had enough time to
Nah,
go into it. But you lose that aspect of
you
it at the
do.
same time. So
And that's an important aspect because that gives, I mean,
yeah,
that gives the universe where this exists a great deal of depth.
right.
And it's an important part of the myth. The turtle is what threw up the universe. The turtle
Mhm,
is fairly benevolent,
mhm.
and an important character, not just in the story itself, but the turtle exists in almost all of Stephen King's universe, and he
Yeah,
he discusses the turtle in the Gunslinger series. The
yeah.
turtle is one of the guardians of the beams. I believe the turtle was the opposite of the bear guardian, if I remember correctly. But
I think so.
regardless, for me, I loved the turtle. I wanted to know more about the turtle.
Right.
So that was a disappointment that they didn't touch on it in the movies. But
Mhm.
again, I don't think they would have done a good enough job to really warrant its inclusion.
Yeah, well, yeah, they definitely would not have. And I do agree with you that I like that aspect. And he in a lot of ways he was one of the first people in the literary world, and I'm not counting comic books or anything like
Hmm.
that, but just books, movies, um, where he basically made a multiverse.
Yes.
And but he made a multiverse, not like the annoying shit that they make now with
Hmm.
Marvel and everything, where it's just an
Hmm.
excuse to sell toys.
Yeah.
Like it's not that. I hate all of that stuff. But he made a multiverse where it was very much he didn't spell it out, and it's not like these worlds are all interconnected, but it's not like they're all leading up to the big like, oh, we gotta fight Thanos or
Yeah.
anything. It's just it's basically crossovers and like bleed throughs, but he doesn't draw too much attention to it. It
Yeah.
never overtakes the story that he's telling.
Yeah.
Because I know I haven't read the Gunslinger books, but I kind of want to, like the Dark Tower and everything. But
Yes. Yeah.
I know he has an element in that where because doesn't in that the Dark Tower isn't that like a gateway to other worlds? Isn't that how they?
It's kind of
Maybe
the
I'm
nexus
misremembering.
point. The Dark Tower is kind of the nexus point
Okay.
of all the worlds coming together. The talisman, the novel he wrote with Peter Straub.
Yeah.
That kind of deals also with the Dark Tower, but it's the Dark Tower is kind of the nexus point. And yeah, I'm not real certain about the mythology here, but I believe the Dark Tower is kind of, yeah, it's the center of everything.
Okay. So that would make sense
Yeah.
because I know, I think in one of those books, they mention those arachnid monsters from The Mist.
Yes.
Um, and that's always something that stuck out to me. And it's, yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, there's all this lore in it that he
Yeah.
just hints at.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because, like you said, I like Lovecraft, you do too. And there's a lot of influence from that, just the unknown,
Yeah.
the fear of that unknown,
Yeah.
and delving into that, and also I think he handles this pretty well because I think a lot of stories always have a hard time with how do you have mortal characters, how do you have them defeat this all
Yes.
powerful, omniscient, being, and that's always something that's hard when people try to adapt like Lovecraft's stuff because the
Yeah.
idea is you can't beat these things;
Yeah.
they're unbeatable. They're so far beyond us. So how do you win in the end? And
Hmm.
so he handles it pretty well, which is and it works in a book format again where he has enough time to explain the rules
Yeah.
and ultimately they only really win because the giant space turtle helps them,
Yes.
and
Exactly.
without that turtle they wouldn't have been able to overcome, so they essentially need the aid of a benevolent cosmic entity to take
Yeah.
out another, and that's realistic
It
because
is.
and that's why I don't like the movies because it's so convoluted how they beat this thing, and in both of those movies. And in the
Yeah.
final one, I don't think there's any turtle or anything like that. And so it's just them defeating this giant, all powerful thing that could kill them at any time,
Yeah.
but never does.
Yeah.
And in the books, it makes more sense because, again, he has time to
Yeah.
explain the logistics of it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's just what it comes down to. Because, like, a lot of these ideas and a lot of these plot threads and stuff like that, if they're not handled correctly, they will come off as stupid. They
Correct.
will come off as nonsensical. It's the same with the three body problem adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
where there's so much in those original books where if you didn't have enough time to explain them, they would be well, they would be the Netflix show. They would be stupid. They would be dumbed down, and they would be because it's the same with it, where you hear some of this stuff out of context,
Yeah.
and there's some stuff obviously, like you said earlier that I don't like the underage
Yeah.
sex scene at the end, and
Yeah.
a lot of the weird young homoerotic stuff that he does.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is not to say I have. I'm not saying that because I have anything against gay characters, but it's the fact that they're young. They're young kids,
Yeah.
and he takes so much time in explaining what they're doing to each other, and to me, that some of that is. I almost want to give him credit for even attempting
Trying.
that. Yeah, for trying that, because who would even think to
Yeah.
put that in there?
Yeah.
Um, so in a way, I almost give him credit. I don't like it, but I give him credit
Yeah.
because, in a way, he probably achieved what he wanted because it makes me uncomfortable, and that's probably what he wanted.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and it was a hell of a risk. In all good writing, all good storytelling is risk taking.
Right.
And I just want to touch on something that you had said. You talk
Yeah.
about, he has the time to develop these things. He also had the audience that wants it. And that
Right.
brings into question, do we have audiences anymore that want these well-developed storylines? And
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know if it's always been, I mean, in general, audiences are lazy and just want to be satisfied on a very shallow level, or
Hmm.
are we becoming more shallow as time goes on? I don't know. But I love him because he does develop his stories. Um,
Right.
I mean, and not just, you know, not just his stories, but they intertwine. You know, for example, I mentioned the
Mhm.
Talisman that has Dark Tower mythology in it. In the Dark Tower series itself, we discover what happened to Pennywise the Clown. Um,
Oh.
there are ties between the Dark Tower and oh my God, the famous Stanley Kubrick movie. Here's Johnny.
Oh.
The haunted hotel. What am I
The
thinking of?
Shining. The
The Shining.
Shining.
Yeah. I mean,
Here's Johnny.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Shit. So what I'm saying is, I mean, he really does pull his whole universe together, and the Dark Tower is at the very center of it.
Mhm.
Um, so anyways, and the Dark Tower is worth the read. When I finished the last page of the Dark Tower series, I put the book down and I thought to myself, in a good way, I'm never
Mhm.
going to read another Stephen King book again, not even one I love, because it is now over. I felt so completed um, as a reader. I felt so completed with the story. Now,
Right.
it took me 5 or 6 years, but eventually I did go back. But I really liked the way he developed and finally ended the Dark Tower series. One other thing I wanted to mention is
Yeah.
you had mentioned, you know, how these characters beat this huge Lovecraftian cosmic being, and it needed,
Yeah.
you know, the help of another cosmic being. What I do like about Stephen King is in his stories, that's not we do not always win. I'm thinking, for
Right.
example, Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of Lovecraftian elements. In fact, I remember I read that book in like the fifth grade, and
Mhm.
I remember him describing some of the creatures that live in the woods. These great, huge creatures
Mhm.
that were just tromping through the woods and had absolutely no concern for the main character. He was a bug, um,
Mhm.
and the story Pet Cemetery does not have a happy ending either. Uh,
Right.
but anyways,
Few of his books do.
yeah, they really, yeah. What are your feelings about the series coming out, Welcome to Derry?
I heard about this. I don't know what it was. I'm gonna look into it more today, but I don't know much about it,
Yeah,
and I don't know necessarily how to feel about it
I know.
because I feel like it's something that sounds like something I would like, which makes me hesitant.
Yes, because
So
it
I don't.
sounds like something that could fuck up really easily.
It does. Can you
Yeah.
explain maybe a little bit more about what
Welcome, yeah,
it's?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Welcome to Derry will be the prequel to it. It will give more history of how it came to Derry.
Hmm.
It will give history of, you know, how it came to be established within the town itself. Um,
Right.
so yeah, you're going to get a lot of backstory of it. That's about all that I know. I am again hesitant as well because I'm
Mhm.
worried they're going to take something I love and fuck it up.
Yeah, I that's how I felt with because I'm a big fan of Frank Darabont's The Mist,
Mm-hmm.
the movie with
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Jane. I think that's one of the better Stephen King
Yes.
adaptations.
Yes.
And the way it ends, I'm not going to give spoilers for that
Yeah.
because that is one of my favorite endings in any movie I've seen. Just they didn't pull any punches, and
No.
it stays true to Stephen King.
Yeah.
Um, but crap, where was I going with that? We were talking about. Oh yeah. Ruining because they made a show called The Mist.
Oh,
Um, a little while ago. Well, I say a little while ago. I think it might have been like maybe 2 3 years ago.
okay.
I forget what it was on, and I watched it, and it was. I would maybe go so far as to say it was bad.
Mhm.
I did not like it, and it's because it's so antithetical to Stephen King in a lot of ways. I think
Mhm.
one of the biggest things is that it basically removes, and I almost respect what they were trying to do because they were trying to make the mist way more metaphorical
Yeah.
than how it's been portrayed. Because in the original story, the monsters are really there; they're
Yeah.
really monsters.
Yeah.
But there's metaphor on top of that, obviously, with how society can collapse when rules are taken away.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's all you need. But
Yeah.
they go a step further And there's not really any monsters in it. It's like hallucinations, and it's not. It's kind of lame. I'm not gonna lie. It's very
Yeah.
lame. I don't recommend watching it.
That's disappointing.
But that's how I feel about this new show. Where I hope it's not like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where it tries to do something just completely different. I mean, if they do it right, it would be like they could delve into the
really
lore
cool.
more. Yeah, they could do that. I see your producer agrees.
My production assistant is again letting me know that he's here and he's on the job, and if I need anything, just let him know. He's awfully helpful, my production assistant, Carlos.
He is. Thank you,
Yes,
Carlos.
yes,
You're
thank you,
always a
Carlos.
great help,
Yes.
and I'm always thankful. No, that was a great pick, man. That really was. I'm
Thank you.
glad you did.
Yeah. So tell me about your fifth pick.
Do you have anything else you want to
I
say?
think. Let me look at my notes real quick because when you talk, I take notes a lot of times. No,
idea.
that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Okay. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that. Thank you. That was a nice surprise.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, I guess this isn't going to be a huge pivot then. It is in terms of modality and stuff like that. But kind of going back to talking about existentialism and the unknown, my final pick is the indie video game known as Outer Wilds. Before we go any further into that, do you know what it is?
You have talked about it a couple times, but give me a good synopsis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a hard game. Oh, yeah, I see Carlos agrees. It's kind of a hard game to really give just a blatant synopsis in the respect that, and this is one of the reasons I like it, because the story is not told like you would expect from a traditional video game. It's very much the story. It's one of those games where you have to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so in modern times, I could see just your average gamer maybe not really liking it that much.
Mm-hmm.
But people who appreciate environmental storytelling and painstaking care that's taken to these games, they really appreciate it. And essentially, what the premise is the indie game developers who are geniuses in my mind. They created a solar system, and in that solar system, you play as an alien, an unnamed alien that is a space explorer. You're an astronaut, and today is your day to finally get in your ship and explore the outer wilds, the solar system. And it's really creative and very artistic. It's very the style is amazing because it's very the planets are not life-size planets. They're almost like caricatures of planets where you none of the planets really have like an atmosphere, so you can kind of always see like space and everything and stuff like that. And the planets are small and everything. It's very creative. And each planet is very distinct that you go to. And it's also a difficult game because when you're flying your ship around, you have to be aware of gravitational pulls of other planets, all this stuff. It's very in depth. And so at first, it just starts off like this fun space exploration game. And in a lot of ways, it can still be that if you want to. But then quickly you start discovering these artifacts of an ancient alien race. And then you start to really pick up their story and what happened to them. And as you delve deeper into it, you start to realize that there is something dark and mysterious going on. Or at the very least, it's presented as dark and mysterious. At first. And basically what happens is the sun, I think it goes supernova. And every 20 minutes, the sun goes supernova.
Oh, wow.
And you die, but you're caught in a time loop. So you always wake up at the very beginning. And you are I think you're one of the only people that remembers things from other loops, basically. And So it's basically if you die or if you get to the point where the sun explodes, that's when it resets. And
Okay.
it's basically the game starts with you basically trying to stop that
Yeah.
and trying to find a way. And it's very in depth. And it's again, it's one of those stories I really don't want to give away too much. But what I will say is when you finally get to the end,
Yeah.
it recontextualizes your efforts up until that point.
Wow.
Because the threat that was presented to you as dark and mysterious, you realize it could potentially be something beautiful at the same time. And
Okay.
it's actually one of the most emotionally resonant stories I've ever gone through.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Um, and it's one of those stories where you just think to yourself, well, for me personally, I thought there's no way they could top this.
Yeah.
And sure enough, they came out with a DLC. I don't know how much longer after, but they came out with a DLC called Outer Wilds Echoes of the Eye. And sure enough, they outdid themselves because not only is it a great DLC expansion on its own with a great story, but it
Yeah.
also adds to the original story and adds even
Oh,
greater context. And it deals with things like mass genocide,
oh, wow.
um, isolation, existentialism, and it's also the fear of not being able to go back, how we have to live with
Yeah.
our decisions in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. And it's just truly terrifying. And it's all because the art style is it's not realistic. It's almost like it it's kind of like I'm trying to think of not cutesy, but there's like it kind of has almost like that cartoon animated, like
Yeah.
3D animated kind of feel to it, but it's dealing with
Yeah.
very dark subject material.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Echoes of the Eye DLC, it's borderline horror at that point at some
Okay.
parts, and it is truly it literally is art. Whenever people say video games are art, Outer Wilds is what they're talking about.
Okay.
Games like that, it is
Yeah.
truly interactive art. So yeah, I really don't want to spoil much. I recommend to anybody that's listening to this, if you want something truly exceptional and something that'll challenge you both your motor skills and your emotions and your patience, I would definitely try it out. The Outer Wilds.
I'm looking at images of gameplay
Yeah,
right now. I mean, it is beautiful.
it's fucking
It
gorgeous.
really is. And again,
It's
we're back to video game as storytelling, which is funny
mhm,
because I mean, I'm young enough where I remember, Pac-Man. There really
right.
wasn't a story with Pac-Man.
Mhm,
And then I remember, for example, Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, they put out I'm thinking of like some of their Forgotten Realm games, but the very old, like late 80s, early 90s Dungeons and Dragons games, started to introduce storytelling to video games, and how far it has come just in a couple decades, where it has become so much more immersive that the storytelling is quality. I mean,
right.
it's just really quality. Um, so I just, again, I'm really curious what it's going to be like in the next 30, 40, 50, 100 years from now.
Mhm,
What will video game storytelling become? Are
mhm,
we eventually all going to be characters in the stories? Are
right.
we, I think it should be really interesting if we as a species live that long anyways. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of how quickly all of that happens,
yeah,
and it's no, I know what you mean though, and about the evolution of things, and
yeah.
it's definitely that's a game that you and I should probably play together sometime,
Is it a
and
multiplayer?
it's not, but I
Okay.
can, well, I was like I can stream it, and
Ah,
you can watch
yes.
and stuff like that because even if you can't play together, it's something that is a lot of fun to experience with other people.
Interesting.
Um,
All right.
So maybe that's something that we could do. We can talk
Absolutely.
about that later. Um, but yeah, no, those are good points. I have no idea where it's heading. I don't know what because it always seems like there's games like Outer Wilds or Half Life Alyx or Baldur's
Ooh,
Gate 3 where
yeah.
they always seem to set a new standard
Yes.
for where things can go. And it's always interesting to kind of see. how people take that and whether they
Mm-hmm.
pervert it or if they make it into something beautiful.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, that is my fifth and final pick. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to say before we.
No, no, no. Well done. I really enjoyed discussing all our favorite stories that have had a big influence on us. Um,
Mhm,
like I said before, I'm sure, I mean, all we have in the end is our stories.
mhm,
And really, if we embrace our stories are powerful.
mhm. They are, and ultimately looking at your stories, dissecting them, analyzing them, and understanding what they say about
Hmm.
us, what they say about our sensibilities. I think that's important. Like you said, at the end of the day, all we have are our stories,
Yeah,
and stories are timeless um, in some respect, where they can transcend time. They outlive us,
they do.
and in a lot of ways, stories are more real than we are because we die and we wither away.
Indeed.
But stories are eternal,
Yeah.
and yeah, they're important. But honestly, Justin, thanks so much. I had a blast doing this.
Mr. Porat, this was the highlight of my week. Thank you so much for having me. And anytime you want me to come back and bullshit a little bit more, I'd be more than happy to.
You can definitely rest assured, dear viewers, that Justin will be back, and not sure when, but that's something that we'll talk about in the future. I'm sure he'll probably be a regular if I had to guess. Um, but yeah, thanks again, man. Thanks so much, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And I will see you in the next one.